All right, welcome back to the Picking Your Brain podcast, where we interview people doing ministry at a high level. And on today's episode, we have Dr. Lee Myers. What's up, Lee?
What's up, man?
Thank you so much for joining me today. If you don't know Lee, I'll give him a chance just in a second to introduce himself. But we got to spend a weekend together in Tennessee, at a conclave, Southeast Conclave, and so we've known each other, on and off for the last several years. Been kind of in similar circles, but really enjoyed getting to visit with you the last weekend, and so I just knew I had to have you on so we can visit. You can kind of share what you're doing now and all the things you're learning. And so, real quick, if somebody doesn't know who you are, tell them who you are, where you're serving, and all those things.
Well, I have been in student ministry right at about 34 years now. And
Nice.
currently, my role is the first time I haven't been on staff at a church. Uh, my role right now is I'm working with the Louisiana Baptist Convention as the youth strategist for the convention. And so I'm following I have some big shoes to fill following your boss who was here. Um, but yeah, I've served in Louisiana about 27 years, and then before that, I was at some churches in Mississippi. But the last 4 years, I've been at First Baptist Church at Jonesboro, Arkansas, serving as a student pastor. And then back in October, I came here and filled this role. So I'm excited to be back in Louisiana. I am a big fan of all things Louisiana, and man, just excited to be back and working with student ministers. So I get to do a lot of cool things. So I'm excited about that.
Yeah, so when we were at Conclave, and so if you've never been to Conclave, I highly want to plug Southeast Conclave. It's great. But
Yeah,
Louisiana booth next year is going to be sick. So if you go, you
it's
got to
gonna be
swing
lit.
by, right?
It is. You want to pass a good time. You come over to our booth, man. We got some great
Yeah,
ideas.
yeah,
So
we were
I'm
brainstorming.
excited
So
about Conclave next year. It's gonna be fun.
that'll be worth the price of admission. Just swing by the
It
Louisiana
will
booth.
be. It will be. You may not want to go to any other booth.
And then you can hang out with people like us. We're all going to be there
That's
just
right.
hanging out. So it'll be good.
And if you feel really high about yourself, we'll knock you down a peg, man. We're there to keep you humble.
We might even have a guy who has a mic who's just roasting people. We've talked about it. And
Definitely.
so, not trying
Definitely.
to give you
We're
teasers,
working with
but
his agent right now, trying to make that happen. Oh
all right.
man.
Well, Lee, the format of the podcast is super simple. I'm just going to ask you a few questions about you as a minister and what God's doing in your life. And so you can just talk to us about how you think about ministry so we can all learn from you today. And so I just want to
Awesome.
get started with this first question. And I've really enjoyed asking different guys this, just seeing their answers, what they do, especially guys like you who've been doing ministry for over 3 decades. What does your daily quiet time look like?
Um, my daily quiet time is probably a little different from some of the other guys that you've talked to. Um, now, there are times where I will go through seasons of my life where I will do my quiet time a certain way. I'm the kind
Mm-hmm.
of guy I've gotten bored with repetition, and so I
Yeah.
have to do some things in there that kind of mix it up just so I can stay consistent. I was very fond of the whole HEAR method, and the highlight, explain, apply, and respond. Anytime I'm looking at God's word, I'm thinking about those things in my mind. How what the text is saying to me. I'm a kind of guy, I like getting up early in the morning and doing my quiet time. A lot of times, though, it'll be the first thing I do when I hit the office. I'll come in here for 5, 10, 15 minutes, whatever, and just kind of sit down and look at God's word. Um, I love that whole idea of journaling and asking that question. How is God working in my life? And so when I read the text, the first thing I think about is the context. The context is the message. I learned that years ago at Mississippi College under a professor named Dr. Roger Green. And that's just something I try to apply whenever I'm reading God's word or looking at the text. So I'll do that a lot of times. And then sometimes there are seasons in my life where I will go through devotion books and I will
Okay.
start reading some things, just kind of work through them. I just finished one that was recommended to me by Dr. Bob Stewart, in OBTS called Lessons from Lewis, and it's a little devotion book that has some devotions that Dr. Stewart led down at NOBTS based on the life of C.S. Lewis. I'm a C.S. Lewis junkie. Read some of his stuff when I was in college and just got addicted to it. Just finished a great biography that Alistair McGrath wrote about him, C.S. Lewis, A Life. It was really good. But I love reading stuff like that. So I also do a big fan of Jerry Bridges' Pursuit of Holiness. That's a book that I have read multiple times. And every time I read it, I get something different out of it. And so that's sometimes during my quiet time, I will do those sort of things. So I just kind of like to mix it up a little bit.
Yeah. And I don't know if this is just insecurity in me or a stigma that I've put it on myself. I've always kind of thought as a minister, I shouldn't use devotionals. I shouldn't need to use devotionals. I shouldn't use the YouVersion Bible app Devos. I should be mature enough to just read scripture on my own. But it's been so cool to hear guys like you, who I highly respect. My last episode was Dr. Scott Touch, who is just this incredible minister. He uses the YouVersion Bible app. He does stuff on there. I'm like, okay, cool. That kind of has been relieving pressure
there's
off of me.
There's a lot of things that we can learn from other Christians. And one of my big deals, and you'll hear me say this a lot of times if you're around me much, I'm a big believer in being a lifelong learner. I learned a long time ago, I don't know everything. I may act like I know everything sometimes, but I seriously, I don't know everything. And so, admitting that and realizing that there's a lot that I can learn from people that have gone on before me, especially even in student ministry, looking at some of those guys that served at places, before I even showed up on the scene. There's a lot you can learn from those guys. And so that's kind of how I view devotions. When I go through, I want to know what God's saying to people, because sometimes God will use that to speak into my life.
Yeah, absolutely. And just tagging on to being a lifelong learner, even in the youth ministry world, we can learn from the younger youth ministers. Maybe not in structures or systems necessarily, because maybe we kind of have those, but there's things about this culture that they probably know better than us. And so don't ever think just...
I saw something the other day on social media that somebody was asked, that they had posted this thing on there about how, young youth ministers, they are seeking out advice and stuff from older guys. But what if some of us older guys, we started just asking them, so tell me what's going on in your ministry right now, and how are you handling the way this generation is responding to things? So I think there's a lot we can learn from these younger guys.
Yeah, their perspective is going to be big, especially the next 2 to 3 years, as the world is constantly changing, especially since COVID. But anyway, we can ramble on.
They're closer to the culture than we are. They're closer to them in age, and so they understand the culture better. I mean, we're finding ourselves being more and more missionaries in a foreign country the older we get.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I'm now 30, so like I'm not old by any sense, but like I am now feeling that shift where I no longer know exactly everything that's going on. Like I have to do a little more research, and so I'm kind of getting in that phase. So I'm like, I need that 22-year-old youth pastor.
You got up in the morning and something just kind of starts popping. You're like, oh, what was that? You start.
not yet. I'm sure that's coming. But talking about new student pastors and veteran student pastors, what would you recommend as some resources? Like if there's a new student pastor, he's brand new out of church, what's some stuff he needs to read? Or what are some things that, man, as you've gotten older, you said, hey, this book really influenced me as I was even a veteran in student ministry? What would you recommend?
Well, for somebody that's new, the first advice I would give them is don't try to bite off more than you can chew, especially on the front end, because that's a quick way to wear yourself out. And burnout is something that we experience a lot in student ministry. And so I would tell them, anything that you could do to help yourself as far as making things simpler, things that can kind of teach you the process of how to develop your midweek services or Sunday school or whenever it is that you're in front of students. I think that's a big plus. There's a curriculum out there, and I'm not getting anything for telling you about this, but it's that GROW curriculum. I think it's for somebody who's just starting out in student ministry. I think the GROW curriculum is a great curriculum to check out. Now, it's something that you can use, and it's something that you can kind of glean yourself off of as
Yeah.
you mature in ministry, but it's going to give you everything you need as far as like uh, media stuff. It's going to give you, an outline. It's going to give you some things, and you can kind of see how that comes together. And you don't necessarily have to follow it word for word. You can
Yeah.
just take the points off of it and kind of develop it uh, as a skeleton, so to speak. And you're putting the body parts on it as you develop your messages and things like that. That's if you need help in that area. I mean, that's a
Yeah.
resource
Yeah.
that's there for you. And you can modify it however you want to do it, but it's going to help you develop habits and things for that. So I would say that is probably a good resource for student ministers that are just starting out. Just get
Hmm.
some help like there, and that way you won't be so overwhelmed when each week. It kind of helps you. They give you a system of where you can like map out your parent meetings. You can map out any kind of fellowships you got coming up. It gives you tons of ideas, and they've done all the legwork in that area.
Hmm.
So you just kind of personalize it to make it fit what you need it to do. So I would say that would help you not experience the stress that can come with just jumping into that kind of position.
Yeah.
That's one that I would say. Um, so I think just starting out, that's a good one. Um, I think Doug Field's book, My First 2 Years in Student
Yeah.
Ministry, is still a classic.
Yeah.
I think it's a great one. And I don't want to be left out of the loop of promoting the Tony Evans book as well, because it seems like Tony Evans has stock in your show, and his book of
Yeah.
illustrations is also a great resource.
It's so good. I can't
I was
rave
listening
about
to
it
some of your
enough.
podcasts, and like everybody was talking about it, and it really is a great resource. And his study Bible is fantastic, by the way, too.
So,
So
so if you
um,
still haven't bought it, somebody you need to buy it. Whoever you need to get it.
that's
It's so
right.
good.
That's right. One thing you need to check out, certainly. But
Uh,
and I think probably the other resource, and I don't think this gets brought up enough, but talk to other youth ministers. Talk to
yeah.
other people that are doing youth ministry in your area. Start developing those networks and spend some time, go out for coffee or whatever, and sit down and pick people's brains and just kind of ask them how are they doing things. Look, there is
Yeah.
nothing new in student ministry. It's all been done before, and most of it's just been repackaged to where it looks like an original
Yeah.
idea. I
Hmm.
mean, seriously, but talk to people, have those conversations with other youth ministers. That's the best resource you can have, aside from God's word, is sitting there talking to people and asking them questions. And
Yeah.
man, use that information to your advantage.
Yeah, like last night, my sermon was on like godly friendships and characteristics. And so one of the points where I talked about iron sharpens iron, but that same principle applies for student pastors, man. Like
Right,
if I'll call Brandon Allen and pick his brain on stuff. Me and him don't do ministry the same way. We do ministry differently because of our personalities, how God's wired us.
right.
And so it's not that he does it right and I do it wrong, or vice versa, but I can learn to be like, man, that's a perspective I never thought of, or that's a way to do ministry I never would have thought of. And so I like Bob Ross painting. He does a Bob Ross
Mhm.
painting night. When I first heard it, I'm like, that's dumb. Kids will not like that. And now
They
we've done
love
it.
it. Oh,
We've
we've
done it
done it.
2 years in a
They
row
love
now.
it.
Yeah, and
We downloaded the
it's a
music,
hit.
had the music playing in the background while we were doing it. It's
Yeah,
fantastic. And I'm like, y'all really like this.
yeah.
Um,
And so
One of
that's
the things I used to do
yeah.
a lot of is I would go to these conferences and I would hear like these speakers and stuff, and they would get up and speak, and I would always have questions. And I learned early on that one of the best things that you can do if you're going to a conference like that is to try to contact that speaker. And at some
Hmm.
point, they've got to go get coffee or they're going to have lunch. And if you can contact them ahead of time and say, hey, I know you're going to be at this conference. I would love to sit down and pick your brain and have lunch with you. That's
Hmm.
also something that I think a lot of young
Yeah,
youth guys need to take advantage of. Have those, like, once
absolutely.
again, you're having those conversations, but on a bigger scale.
Yeah, I got you. And I don't, you may have touched on it, but what's something like a resource or book or something for a veteran student pastor you maybe think, or
Well,
stuff that you've maybe read?
I think for veterans, anything you can find that relates to parent ministry, you
Yeah.
need to jump into it, because the longer I've been in student ministry, the more I've realized how important parents are. They're the number one
Hmm.
influencer of our kids. And I think that anything, and there's a ton of stuff out there. So, I mean, I can't just pick just one off the top of my head, but
Yeah,
anything related to parent ministry,
that's good.
go for it. I also think personal discipleship kind of stuff. Anything by Greg Ogden. He's got a book
Mm-hmm.
called Discipleship Essentials. It's a workbook kind of
Mm-hmm.
thing you can work through. Anything by Bill Hull. He has that complete book of discipleship, which is a great resource to have on your shelf. A guy that I discovered while working on doctoral stuff was a guy by the name of Leroy Imes. And I'll tell you a little bit about him. He's old school. And when you read his stuff, it's like you're talking to a senior adult in your church, and you will have to adapt a lot of it. But there's some great stuff out there. He's got a book, and it's like my favorite book on discipleship. It's called The Lost Art of Disciple Making, and it is
Okay.
fantastic. But there again, you have to read it with a mindset of this thing was written back in the 70s and 80s, but it's got some great content and some great practical stuff in there that can apply towards student ministry. I think if you can ever get your hands on a copy of Dr. Alan Jackson's book, Teach, and
Yep.
the one he did after that, the Disciple book, which is the Ordinary Person's Guide to Discipling Teenagers. If you can find copies of those, I don't think they're in print anymore, but if you can find those are great
Mm-hmm.
resources for a veteran. If you want to start moving your student ministry towards discipleship and students making disciples, especially the peer-to-peer stuff, that's been a big deal for me. I think the Ben Trueblood book, Student Ministry That Matters, is a good one. I think Duffy Robbins had a book out called Building Youth Ministry That Builds Disciples. That's a good one. And then, of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the Richard Ross book, Student Ministry and the Supremacy of Christ. All those books are going to help you start developing this discipleship making mindset that I think all student ministers need to start gravitating toward, because that's what we're in the business of. We're in the business of making disciples. So as a veteran, those are the things I would really say you need to go after.
Yeah. Two things that came to mind as you were talking is the Richard Ross. I think I maybe mentioned on another episode, but Youth Ministry That Lasts a Lifetime is, I would say, like just a great book for a veteran or a young student pastor. That one is just full of really good stuff.
Anything he puts out. I follow him on social media. Oh my goodness, this guy is just like crushing it still.
So encouraging.
So I anything he puts out, consume it, eat it up.
And then the other thing you're talking about, and I feel this too, the older I get, the more I lean to the parent ministry side of student ministry. But I was just at a DNOW in Alexandria, Calvary in Alexandria, and they do a thing, and I think Brandon Allen says they do it too, but they do an equipping of parents during DNOW. So on the Saturday morning where students are doing a session or doing a serving, they have a conference at the church for parents. And so I was able to come speak, and another guy who I hope to have on the podcast soon, Clint Davis. So we got to spend 2 hours with parents, equipping them about technology and things like that. And so if there's a way you can fit something like that into an event you're already doing, man, that was a home run.
Oh, yeah, it's a win-win. I was just at a DNOW. Well, it's not a DNOW. You've been a part of it before. It's the Princess Warrior Weekend that John Nugent does. And on that Sunday morning, he actually drives back to his church while we're at the camp and leads a session for parents during Sunday school.
That's cool.
Which I think is kind of cool because you're already hitting the parents when they're going to be there at church.
Yep.
I'm a big proponent of anytime you can plan something while the parents are already there, do it. Because their time is the most valuable thing that they're going to give you. And if you can make it easy for them to give you their time, they'll do it.
Absolutely. Okay, well, we'll just kind of transition to the next one. It kind of goes along with what we're talking about. What are some of the most unique student events that you may have seen that are effective? And because you've been in Mississippi, Arkansas, Louisiana, you've been talking to some guys probably a lot the last few months in particular. What are some of the most unique things you can think of?
Well, first off, everything I'm going to tell you about, I didn't come up with it. I learned it from somebody else. So I'm going to tell you, I'm that guy. I'm not the most creative guy in the room, but I like to surround myself with creative people. I like to hang out with creative people. And I do a lot of nodding. I'm just kind of like, okay, yeah, that's good. I'm the guy that's in the corner going, yeah, I agree with that. That's a good one. I'll tell you, I think everything you plan for as events goes, you need to have a purpose behind it. If the purpose is fellowship, the purpose is fellowship. I think about one of the coolest things we ever did. in Jonesboro was there was one weekend where we did a tea party. It was real fancy. I involved our senior adults in it. We had
Okay.
this senior tea party for the girls in our church. It was dress up. It was wear the hats, the whole deal, the gloves, the 9 yards, and they, if you wanted to do that, you could do that. And we had some of our senior adults host that. At the same time, I was running a beast feast for the guys in our ministry.
Yeah.
There was a bank there that had this amazing, awesome grill, and we just went
Okay.
and got a bunch of hamburgers and meat, and the kids could bring their own. You was bring your own, stuff kind of deal, and we just sat there and we grilled and played wiffle ball while we were grilling, and it was one of the coolest things ever that we did
That's awesome.
as an event. It was just a fellowship event. There wasn't anything
Hmm.
super spiritual about it, but those two things were great, and they met the needs of our kids. Um, I think one of the coolest things ever, and I did this as a back to school event. And I stole this from a guy named Greg Gober, who you probably know.
Yeah.
He was at
Yeah.
Cypress Baptist, but he would do this thing called the Hunger Games, and it
Oh
was a
gosh.
back to school event. And it's one of these things where you get these kids to come. Now before the event, you need to contact parents and businesses and just get all these different gift cards. And man, we probably had almost $3,000 worth of gift cards donated,
Oh wow.
and we had them set up in a table in our gym. And Greg used to do it all over their campus, but we were downtown church, so we had to kind of do it in our gym. But everybody would put on the football flags, and they had to go around and try to pull each other's flag till it got down to one person. Now, in the midst of all that, they could go to the middle of the room where all the gift cards were and try to get a gift card off the table. Well, if they went up there and tried to get it, you're opening yourself up to where you can be
Yeah.
eliminated. And it got down to these two girls at the end, and it was legit because you make your circle smaller as they're going in. And
Yeah.
so it's competitive, and kids are making alliances with each other, and do they trust one another? And of course, there's your
Oh, that's
spiritual
cool.
application right there when you talk about trusting. And so it was massive. We had about 160 kids involved in this thing.
Oh
And
my
it
gosh.
got down to these two girls, and it was ruthless, them trying to pull each other's flag. Um, but that was a great outreach event that we did, and they were inviting their friends to come and be a part of that. And we did that. Of course, Christmas time always has stuff. We've done the reindeer games before, and you can
Yeah.
Google that and look that up. I like to use a lot of Adventure Rec. So if there's some events that we
Okay.
can like set up a scenario, um, and the kids have to learn something from the actual thing that they're doing, that's always good. But I'll tell you one of the, and we've done murder mystery nights. Now, we didn't actually have the murder, but we would have a
Yeah.
chalk outline, and we did a deal with somebody got beamed with a bean burrito. That was the murder weapon. And so, you had to go and do all these different tasks to figure it out. And you just set it
Yeah.
up kind of like a murder mystery party kind of thing. That was always great.
That's fun.
But I'll tell you, the thing that I think made the biggest impact is we had some of our students make cookies. And then one
Okay.
Sunday, we had all of our students go around and deliver these cookies to the Sunday school classes. And that gave our
Okay.
senior adults an opportunity to meet some of our students and to talk with them and to socialize with them. Anything you can do to keep the body together,
Yeah.
I think is a win. So many times you see these student ministries are out on an island somewhere, or they're very siloed, and it's almost like it's a church within a church. I don't think that's God's intention. I think anything you can
Yeah.
do to promote intergenerational ministry is what you need to be doing. So those are just a
Absolutely.
couple ideas of some things just right off the top of my head that
Yeah.
we've
No,
done
those are
that were real
great.
successful.
I'm stealing Hunger Games. That's good. We're gonna do that this
You need
summer.
to. You need to
That
bring it
sounds
back.
so cool.
Oh, it
Yeah.
was awesome. It was
Because
awesome. It was just funny just watching those kids try to negotiate with each other about who's going to
yeah.
stay loyal.
Oh, because our summer, the way our summers look on Wednesday night is we do what calls summer sessions. So we have about a 30-minute service where it's like two songs and then a small kind of devotional thing, whether that's me or a high school pastor or, a student. So it's a lot smaller of a worship set. And then the last hour is some kind of fellowship something. So I'm stealing that. Hunger Games. It's going to be fun. I'm looking forward to that. All right. So you mentioned it earlier. You have transitioned to the state. And so, as somebody who did student ministry for a long time and probably worked with state guys, what are something that a normal student pastor may not realize about what it is like working for the state, or
You
some
have to fill
some
out a
yeah,
lot of reports.
okay,
You have to fill out reports upon reports, a lot of reports. There's a lot of clerical work that goes with it. Um, but I think a lot of the job is PR and a lot of cheerleading, youth ministers supporting them.
yeah,
You want to encourage them. I think a lot of it is networking. I think there's a little bit of coaching in there, especially for some of the younger guys that have questions. Um, I think you have to think future. You have to kind of plan things a couple years out. Um,
yeah,
there's a lot of traveling involved.
mhm,
I got a car back in November, and it's February 1st today, and we're recording this, and I've already got 9,000 miles on it. Because
oh
I do a
wow,
lot of it's a lot of driving around the state and just talking to guys, and
yeah,
so that's a lot of it. Right now, we've shifted into to camp planning. We've got
mhm,
that coming up. We do 4 weeks of camp during the summer, and it's a lot. You have to cover every logistic when you do that. Um,
yeah,
I think the other thing you have to think about too is like with events, having to be really good at developing a budget and
yeah,
trying to get promotional stuff out there. We do the forum in Louisiana. It's a once a year kind of deal where we bring in somebody and we talk about a topic. So that's probably our next big event we have coming up. But just making sure that you got all those logistics lined up, and then
yeah,
of course YEC is the biggest event that we do, and
yeah,
it's like we're having a meeting here in next week, starting to talk about YEC and what we're going
wow,
to do in November, because it's the largest event that we have in the state.
mhm,
As far as even Southern Baptist, it's like
yeah,
it's the crown jewel,
yeah,
so to speak. So it's a lot of planning, a lot of stuff is involved with that. So, um, but looking from behind the scenes, like I'd always saw guys in this role, and
yeah,
I just wondered what they were having to do every day, and
yeah, yeah,
my days are full. I mean,
yeah,
there are things that always need my attention. So, um, I think, but for the main part of it, I think a lot of it is just building relationships and just talking to people. And if you
yeah,
can't do that, then this is not the job for you. You know?
yeah. And so I would imagine it was not a hard transition, but like if you're going from a church to a church, you have an idea or a blueprint. This is what I need to do. This is kind of my
Yeah.
first 90 days need to look like this, whatever. I'm waiting a year before I change anything major, those kind of things. Has it been similar to that, or has it been like, bro, I
Well,
don't know,
I was
I don't know what
blessed
I'm doing?
because yeah. Well, I was blessed because my predecessor
Yeah,
was still around, and so I was
yeah,
able to kind of ask him questions. A lot of times when you're in the local church and a youth pastor, you're following somebody, you don't have that luxury. So
yeah,
I'm still able to do that. I still text him all the time, asking him questions, and
yeah,
I know I probably sound like a complete idiot sometimes when I'm talking to him, but I have to ask those questions, and so that's been the biggest transition as far as uh, just trying to figure things out, trying to learn how things work. Um, the thing with not being in the local church, there were times I would leave the office, and you know how it is. You're thinking about a student, or you're thinking about a situation, or you're thinking about what am I going to do this week, or we have camp coming up. Has everybody got their deposits in? We have these deadlines, and all these things like that. Um, we have that somewhat in this role,
mhm,
but every day when I get up and I walk out the door, um, I don't pick it back up again until I come back in the next morning. So that's the
yeah,
biggest difference, and that's the hardest thing to adjust to, because
yeah,
my mind is geared to where I want to think about things, and I'm always processing, always thinking, what can I do to improve things? Um, there's a quote I heard the other day. It says, "The next thing we do needs to be better than the last thing we did." And so that's just kind of has been
it's cool.
my motto for this season in my life. Like I want to improve. If something was great, great, but how can we make it better? And so
Yeah,
um, I think that's what I'm trying to bring to the table in this role.
that's cool, man. Well, I know I'm personally excited that you're in that role, and I've, like I said, got to enjoy getting to visit with you, kind of hearing your vision for the state and your heart for helping lead student pastors. So, if you're listening to this and you're a Louisiana guy, or even if you're not, reach out to Lee. He's going to be
Oh
going
yeah,
around the state doing stuff, doing fellowships and stuff. Reach out to him; he'd love to help you. I'm sure.
certainly.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's move into the final question, Lee. And this is something that me and you we were talking on the phone the other day, and it was something I thought was really interesting. So you're going to have opportunities to probably be in front of pastors, to have maybe just conversations with different pastors, different staff. What is something that you can, from a student pastor perspective, maybe help communicate to help them understand about student ministry? Because either some guys that are pastors have never been a student pastor, so they may not understand what we do or the things that we deal with, or maybe guys that did student ministry 20 years ago, but maybe forgot. Hey, these are some things that as a student pastor you're dealing with, you're struggling with. So, what is something you may could say to either a pastor that's listening here, or over the next few months you may get to share with pastors? I know that was kind of a broad question, but I hope that
Yeah.
you kind of have an idea.
Um, but yeah, and I'm glad that I'm in this role where I can say some things, you know,
Yeah,
and I want to be an advocate for student ministry in the state of Louisiana, and especially for youth ministers that may not feel like they can say some things.
yeah,
If I was talking to pastors, and I hope pastors do listen to this, um,
yeah.
I hope you understand you don't need to take your student minister for granted. We're at a point right now, especially in our state. Now, I'm talking to all those state guys over the last few weeks. There is a huge deficit of student ministry professionals uh, in our convention right now.
Hmm.
There are so many, probably 75% of the phone calls I get are from churches that are looking for candidates. And it's not that they're not even getting resumes from
Yeah,
guys. Like for right now, there's a huge shortage of student ministers. And for whatever reason, I mean, you and I have talked about, before, what are some of the reasons for that. But if I'm a pastor, I hope that you will realize that um, you need to protect your staff. You need to take care of them. Don't devalue their calling. The reason they came to your church was to help you. They're there to
hmm,
help you accomplish your vision for the church. So realize that, don't see them as a threat. Don't see them as inexperienced, and you just going to have to tag them along, kind of thing, or a burden. See them as somebody who has value, who's trying to help you accomplish your ministry. And I tell you, I can't stand it when I hear a pastor make an off comment joke or something about student ministry, about how they're lazy, or how youth ministers don't get to the office till 9:30. Well, they were probably at your church till 9:30 the night before, and then doing some
hmm.
kind of event or something like that. um, there's a lot of things that I don't think pastors see. And I think student pastors can help pastors by letting them know what they're doing.
Hmm.
My boss has a
Yeah,
big deal where he says no surprises. So I think if you really want to help that relationship flourish between you and your senior pastor, let them know what you're doing and why you're doing it and when you're doing it. I
yeah,
think that's very important. But I would just say to pastors, just take care of your staff, guard them. Um, a lot of times, and I said this the other day, a lot of times if the adversary can't get to you, he's going to get to those that are closest around you. And
hmm,
for a pastor, it's going to be your staff. So do whatever it takes to protect them from people that are trying to sow discord in the life of that minister or in the church. Um, just take care of them. Realize what you have. You've got somebody who's committed their life to helping you follow the vision and the calling that God has put in your life. So
yeah.
value that. And I tell you, I think Shane Pruitt said it. I can't remember if it was this morning or yesterday. He sent out this tweet. It's like 77% of people accept Christ before the age of 18.
Hmm.
77% was the number he was given. Now I want you to think about that for a second. As a pastor, where do you want to focus your resources? Where do you want to
Yeah,
focus your attention? You want to help that youth minister be the most successful person that they can be and accomplish the job that they have in front of them, which is not an easy
yeah,
job by any stretch of the imagination. So,
yeah,
show them some love, man.
yeah. Well, and something I would just add, and you know this, just being a student ministry so long, that if the longer a student pastor can stay at a church, the healthier the student ministry is going to be. You know, like if
Well, I
the
agree.
long tenure of a student pastor is so vital, and then the staff relationships is what does that. You know, if the
Right.
student pastor feels valued, they feel like they're getting compensated fairly. Like student pastors aren't going to get paid well. We know that
No, no.
if you're in student ministry to get paid well, get out. You're not. But you can live a normal life on a good student ministry salary, but you're just at a church to serve. I would just encourage, staffs or people above, just value your student ministry, value your children's ministry. They're what helps keep families plugged into the church, in my mind.
Right.
Um,
Right.
if, if,
I
if,
know. I
if
know
me
there
and
were
my wife,
several
yeah,
years. I know there were several years that in ministry where I felt like I was not being valued,
mhm,
but the my heart that I had for the people that I was ministering to, that superseded that. And
yeah,
there were times, and I'll confess to you, there were times that I was very close to putting my family on the altar uh,
yeah,
versus my job. And it's one of those things where you kind of have to stop and realize, okay, this is not right,
yeah,
and so a lot of that was brought on because of my heart. And I think every youth minister out there they care about their students, they care about their parents,
yeah,
they care about their church, and they're passionate. And so just to have that in mind, as if I'm a senior pastor, I need to realize that as much as God called me to that church, God's called that staff person to my church.
yeah. Yeah, no, I completely agree, and I'm thankful that I get to serve at a great church. I've been here 8 years, and our staff is incredible, and so it's because our pastor values children's ministry, student ministry often,
Mhm.
and so just an encouragement to if you're a pastor
Well,
listening to
I,
this.
I agree with you. Being someplace long term like that,
Hmm.
you're building up credits. I had a youth minister one time tell me, he said, "You're putting pennies in your pocket." The longer you stay somewhere, because it's going to help people to trust you more, and your ministry is going to thrive the longer you're at somewhere, because
Yeah,
you become part of the family at that point.
yeah.
And so that's good stuff.
Well, thank you, Lee, for joining me today, and we had a good conversation. And hopefully, if some Louisiana guys don't know you, this is a great intro to you, and they'll be like, "Man, I do need to go visit with that guy." And so, again,
Absolutely,
just
my
thank you for
door is
joining me,
always
man.
open, man. And if they want to contact me, they can go on the website and get me information. And I'd love to connect with guys in Louisiana, because I'm here. I'm here to serve you.
And before I wrap this up and tell them how to follow this podcast, you have a podcast. I'll give you real quick. Just tell them about your podcast that you do. Yeah.
Well, I had one, and I think
Oh.
it's fixing to go through some transitions. But now
Okay.
we've got one that's coming up. It'll
Yeah.
probably start after February. It's called the Forum Podcast, and our plan is
Yep.
to try to do one a month, and just kind of talk about some issues and have some people on. And certainly will not be anything in competition with yours, by the way, which I think
Oh
is
well.
fantastic. Of course
We
not.
all need
But
stuff.
you'll
So
see some advertising for it, the Forum Podcast, and we're going to try to bring some guys in from Louisiana, and really focus on student ministry in the state of Louisiana. So
that's
that's
cool.
kind of where my vision is with that. But that'll happen sometime after February of this year. So thanks for the plug, man. Appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so if this is your first time listening to Picking Your Brain podcast, please make sure you follow us. You can follow us on anywhere you listen to podcasts, and we're actually starting to get the video portion of it out on YouTube. So just find us there, and so stay plugged in. We have some great guests lined up that'll be the next few episodes. So make sure you plug in, follow us, get the notifications, and all those things. Hope y'all have a great day.